My guest today is Dr. Craig Carter. We're going to be discussing medical assisted dying, why it matters to Christians, and why it matters to humanity, not as policy, but as a sovereignty of God. Today's topic is kind of serious. It's been in the news quite a bit. I have noticed, I did some research on this, that around the world there are at least 10 countries that are um, accepting of medical assisted dying. And now in Canada, we are promoting, um, now those cases, are supposedly in terminally ill cases within 6 months or so. And there are 14 states as well that accept that. In Canada, we are promoting mental illness to that, adding that as a category, and even poverty, I've heard, is what they're adding soon. So that's probably in the process of being voted on and stuff. But I know you've done some research on this and some understanding. So I'm just wondering how to look at that. If you could give us some background first, and then we'll look at the Christian side of it. Okay.
Well, Canada appears to be the on the cutting edge of the euthanasia movement. We've seemed to be surpassing the Netherlands as the
Wow.
country with the most. We've had it for 10 years with the most deaths per capita. In 10 years, it's gone to um, uh, 5% of all deaths being through assisted suicide in Canada. So that's there's no end in sight. The number is growing. So will it go to 10, 20, 30, 50%? At this point, it's all uncharted territory. We have no precedents. We have no idea of where it is going. But it does look like um, the longer assisted suicide is in operation, and the more it expands its scope, it's like a snowball running downhill. There's a momentum that gathers, and
Right.
so I think that we are nowhere near the peak yet. I think I think we have to go to a fiction book like Brave New World by Aldous Huxley to see the end game. Um, in his imaginary dystopia, um, which was the former Britain, UK. That's what he was writing about. Um, Everybody is euthanized at age 60 and recycled.
Wow.
So that's what happens, and people can be perfectly healthy at 60, but they are conditioned to accept euthanasia as normal. Um, and this is how society is completely organized rationally, um, and that's just the story. The tension in the story just revolves around the few characters who question what everyone else takes for granted. So we're at 5%, and Huxley's imagination, his dystopia, is at 100%. Where will Canada fall in 10, 20 years from now, 30 years from now? It's very difficult to say. But I do think that, personally, I do think that the um, increasing the, if it was really just for extreme terminally ill people in the last stages of life who were undergoing extreme suffering, if that's what the whole bill was about 10 years ago,
You're right.
we would not have seen the growth in numbers that we've seen. We would
No.
not be talking about extending it to uh, minors. We would not be talking about making it available to people with chronic but non-life threatening illnesses. We would not be talking about making it available to people with disabilities. We would not be talking about making it a matter of simple consent with no conditions. We wouldn't be talking about those things. So clearly, the enactment of the law has not been according to the original stated intentions. So when somebody does something and they claim that it's for a certain reason, and then the way they act shows that it's not just for that reason, one is perfectly justified and say, well, what was the person really thinking? What is the real motivation? What's the real intention here? If your stated intention is not being carried out, well, what is your intention? Um, and I think that I think that it's the natural endpoint of socialized medicine, because if you there's not enough money in the we're in a slow growth economy for the last 10 years. The economy is not growing fast, slower than other G7 countries. Taxes are already high, and and the deficit is ballooning under the Liberals prior to Carney and after Carney. So at some point, the government runs out of money. It runs out of
Right.
borrowing capacity.
Mm.
And already across the country, we see emergency rooms being closed. We
Right.
see horror stories of people sitting in emergency rooms for 24 hours, not getting the attention they need, and then
Yep.
sometimes dying right there in the waiting area. Well, in a healthcare, if the healthcare system's already in crisis, if the deficit's getting too high, if the government's capacity to tax is limited, the economy is not growing, the population is aging, the immigrants being brought in to supposedly replace the workers are many of them on welfare and not productive and contributing. At some point, the government runs out of options. And so, where do you get the money? Where do you get quick savings in the healthcare system, which is one of the largest expenditures of the government?
Yep.
Well, most Canadians, the most money spent on our healthcare is in the last 2 years of life. So if you could make everybody die 1 year earlier than they do, you would achieve immense savings in the healthcare
Right.
system.
Sure.
Now, of course, even that will run out. Like,
Right.
the capacity to tax will run out. The ability to borrow will run out. And eventually, you know, Canadians, you can implement euthanasia down to the point where somebody who's 60 years old and catches a cold, you euthanize that person. Like, at some point, you run out of people to euthanize. You can't do it anymore. You can't achieve any more savings
Yeah.
by this policy. So it's a short-sighted policy that's only delaying the inevitable. It's not solving anything. But I believe that's the real intent behind it. I think it's a short-term solution to a long-term problem put forward by politicians who don't plan to be around in to take responsibility for the failure
Right.
later. They just want to see it happen now because it gets them to the next election without the economy totally crashing, and that's all they care about. And so I really think that's the what's driving the motivation behind it. It's a way for the government to avoid running out of other people's money for a little longer.
Now, as someone that just turned 61, all this Huxley's book scares me.
Mm.
Also, as a person that has a disability, it also scares me with the what we have going on here in Canada. Now, I spent 18 days in a coma as well. So this was way back in 87. But what if that was offered to my parents that said, no, I have Christian parents, and they wouldn't have done it. I guarantee that. But they said, this your son is never going to be the same. He's going to be a burden on the healthcare system, and we're going to have to pay out through government programs and stuff. So, do you think his life would be better? Would he? And he'll never be the same. Right? And you know what? There would be people, I'm sure, that would choose that. My brother-in-law chose MAID when he had very severe cancer, and we went to the quote unquote service, I guess, and he was talking with us 1 minute and then gone the next. And that is really a, I don't want to say, well, strange, but it's just unfathomable, really, to see what happened.
Well, it's unfathomable to you because you are a Christian and you have been brought up in a society where we had suicide helplines to help prevent people from
Right.
suicide, and where human life was seen as precious. And you, when you were born, even abortion wasn't legal.
That's true.
So, what about the person who is born today? And
Yeah.
20 years from now, how normal will it seem to that person? I think that's a frightening prospect. And by the way, I saw a speaker in the British House of Lords on X saying that he had never seen, speaking about their assisted suicide bill, saying that he had never seen a bill in his 50 years in the House of Lords that was opposed by every single disability group. But
Wow.
this one was. So that tells you something.
Sure. Yeah. Well, I mean, that's again, other people deciding what quality of life is, for someone else, and it seems the compassionate thing to do. That's how that's framed. That, well, what quality of life would they have as a person that couldn't do A, B, or C? And it's framed as a compassionate thing to, quote unquote, put them down.
Well, it's not compassionate. It's basically an anti-human philosophy that has
Yeah.
gripped them. I mean, human beings um, are creatures with immortal souls,
Right.
made in the image of God,
Yeah.
and human beings are not merely highly evolved animals.
Right.
And so, human beings deserve to be treated with respect. And the idea of deciding someone else's quality of life is totally irrelevant.
Mm,
The issue, a utilitarian calculus cannot determine whether a human life is worth living or not. A human life has inherent dignity. We receive that dignity as a gift. We don't earn it by achievements and accomplishments
right.
and by
That's right.
attaining a quotient of quality in the way we live, having a certain IQ or a certain range of mobility or a certain ability to to do certain physical acts. We don't we don't have to measure up to some standard because there is no standard other than the mere fact of human life itself. Every human being has a rational soul, and every rational soul is is makes that creature in the image of God. Therefore, any act of murder, any act of taking that life is an assault not only on an individual, but it's an assault on God. It is a direct attack on God. So to kill somebody is to raise your hand and strike the Almighty. And the problem is that our society no longer operates with any fear of God.
Right. That's
There
right.
is no
Yeah.
Doctors and nurses should be afraid to end somebody's life on purpose. They should tremble in fear. They should be willing to do anything or suffer any consequence, because nothing that humans can do to them is as bad as what God will do on the day of judgment. And because we've lost the sense of transcendence and the sense of God being the lawgiver and humans being made in His image and therefore having inherent dignity built in, because of we've lost that as a society. Um, Therefore, we can have assisted suicide, and therefore we can have abortion and many other forms of reproductive technologies, everything from surrogate motherhood to in vitro fertilization. What we do is we create the impression that we are in charge of life. We bestow life, and if we bestow it, then we have the right to take it.
Take it away.
So to the one who bestows life in the first place is the one who has the right to take it. That
Right.
used to be seen as God in both cases. Only God can give us children. But now we think that we can create life in the laboratory, and we think that therefore, since we are able to create it, we should be able to make a judgment as to when it should end. And that means that we are basically a functionally atheistic, anti God society, whether we want to admit it or not, or how we dress it up and we cloak it in fine sounding words and all this humanitarian blather. But the point of the matter, the real point is human beings are, we're doing the Tower of Babel thing. We are trying to make ourselves out to be God, put ourselves in the place of
Mhm.
God. And in the process of reaching for divinity, we demean and debase ourselves to the level of animals. That's the
Well,
irony.
that makes me think of, well, we go right back to Lucifer, right?
Mhm.
Trying to replace God.
Yes, and if you've read Milton's great Paradise Lost, the opening chapter is where Satan has been cast down out of heaven, and he's on the earth, and he's regrouping with his fallen angels who have supported him in the war against God. So but the basic point is the one you just made. In reaching too high, he's cast down low. That's the basic
Mm.
moral structure of the universe, and that's what happens to a society when we make ourselves God and try to give and take human life with according to our own will.
Now, I just thought when you were mentioning about doctors and nurses being scared of taking life, I was thinking of the Hippocratic Oath as well, because that states that they do whatever, do no harm is the phrase, I believe it is, that and it seems to contradict that to take the life is to do the ultimate harm.
Obviously,
Yeah,
I was just in Egypt for a couple of weeks, and we we were learning that temples built on the east side of the Nile are usually, the temple complex will include either a hospital or a school,
wow,
and the temples that are built on the west side of the Nile are usually funerary temples. Um, So it's interesting. We were on the right, the east side of the Nile. We were in Luxor, and we were actually in the temple that Moses would have studied, because Luxor was Thebes in the Middle Kingdom, and that was the capital of Egypt, and that's
wow,
where he would have been. And so he was studying in a school there. But in another temple, there was a hospital there, and it was we were talking about Hippocrates, the Greek physician this was pre-Christian. This was several hundred years before Christ,
sure,
that Hippocratic oath became common among physicians.
wow,
Uh, and 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 so what we've got here is just imagine pagan Egypt, from which Israel was delivered in the Exodus. Pagan Egypt had physicians that took the Hippocratic Oath. Um, of course, in ancient times, poisons were used in various ways,
right,
political assassinations, and so on. And it made sense that if you had a priest coming to treat your illness, you would be worried that he might try to kill you.
right,
And this was that he might be bought and paid for by your political enemies. Um, And so the idea of somebody coming into your bedroom when you're sick and saying, "Drink this," you had to have faith and trust in that person. And so the Hippocratic Oath became a standard for the medical profession. If you wanted to make money as a doctor, and
right,
who want to make money, right? So
sure.
if you want to have a reputation, if you want to be called upon by people who can afford to pay you, well, you've got to have some way to reassure them that you're not
Some
going to.
credibility, sure.
And so if you take it, so this is how the Hippocratic Oath functioned. It gave doctors a it was a trade-off. I'm going to live my life under the Hippocratic Oath. I'm going to never poison a patient, even if somebody pays me to, or bribes me to, or threatens me if I don't. I'm going to refuse that. This is going to be the standard by which I live. It's the foundation of my profession. It's the foundation of the trust that my patients have in me. It's the foundation of my income. It's my bank
Yeah.
account. My
Yeah.
bank account's at stake here. So,
Yeah.
so there's a self-interest in this. So sometimes the children of men are wiser than the children of light. I mean, here we are as a supposedly Christian nation in the 21st century, and we're allowing doctors to kill people with impunity. And I don't know if you saw the recent uh, study by the Ethics and Public Policy Center, which looked at a self study done by Ontario MAID supervising agency that said that probably one quarter of all deaths due to MAID in Ontario did not follow the stated government guidelines for how MAID is to be carried out. A quarter. And
Wow.
nothing's happening. Uh, Nobody gets, nobody's in jail. Nobody's lost his medical license. There's no court. There's no cases pending. Nobody's been charged. Nothing's going. No tribunals. No nothing. And so, and then doctors are being also told not to put MAID on this on the on the death certificate.
Yes. Yes.
What-
I read that as well.
Whatever, and this, just to put whatever disease the person had.
Right.
So what this indicates is that we're making it easy for, even if there's one evil doctor out of hundreds or out of thousands, even one nurse practitioner who's
Yeah.
out to kill people,
Right.
one doctor who goes to a family and says, okay, I can make sure your grandmother dies, um, and you can inherit her $1 million fortune,
Right.
for a small fee, for a share of the fortune, I can make
Yeah.
sure that happens. Even if
That
there's
happens.
one person out there doing that, point
Yeah.
is we would never know.
Right.
And the government shrugs in indifference, and the government that goes after somebody for posting anti-transgenderism
Yeah.
posts on social media, the same government that has time to worry about that, shrugs and says, oh well, we just trust doctors and nurses, and what could possibly go wrong, we don't care. Well, I mean, what does the but I want to keep coming back to not just the obvious things that are being done wrong, the obvious evil actions, but what does this say about us as a society? What kind of society are we becoming as a result of
Right.
practicing abortion and euthanasia? I think we're becoming a society that is more and more callous toward human life. I think we are becoming a society that is more and more puffed up and arrogant and proud. I think we are becoming a society that is more materialistic. If somebody can show how somebody has a quality of life, then that's important. And if they can't show a quality of life, then if they're poor, or if they're lonely, or if they're depressed, then we don't value their life. We are becoming a society that does not really love its neighbor.
Right.
Love of neighbor is predicated on seeing the neighbor as having value no matter what the neighbor's economic or life circumstances are. The neighbor
Right.
has inherent value just by virtue of being a human being.
Right.
If we don't have that, then we are losing so much that has made our society. And people think that Christianity has not changed our culture, but there's an excellent book by David Bentley Hart called Atheist Delusions that explodes this myth. He goes back to the Greco-Roman society that existed at the time of the emergence of Christianity, and he shows how callous that society was towards children, towards women, towards human life. Abortion and euthanasia by child exposure was common. Um, it was brutal. Slavery was widely practiced. And he says that we forget that once society was that way, then Christianity affected change and society became Christian. Now we expect that we can abandon Christianity and that all of the improvements wrought by Christianity, this is also the theme of Tom Holland's recent book, Dominion, uh, that all the benefits will stay even after we reject the source and cause of those benefits,
Yeah.
which is
Wow.
Christianity. And he says, isn't it more reasonable to assume that we'll revert to what we were before Christianity came into the world?
Sure.
That's the sensible. So where are we? What kind of people are we becoming? What kind of society are we becoming? What is our future, given our flagrant rejection of Christianity as seen in practices like assisted suicide and abortion?
Yeah, that goes back to the I, I'm going to try and sound smart about the I'm going to use the phrase imago Dei, right? The
Yeah.
the image of God that you were mentioning before.
But the shocking thing, though, is that pagans had a higher value on human life
Yes.
than even our society does. Like
Right.
even within paganism, this is something else that we noticed in Egypt
In Egypt, yeah.
in the last few weeks, is that even within paganism, there's a push and a pull towards a more degraded view of human life and a more exalted human view of human life, toward a sort of degraded polytheism and even a monotheism of worshiping the sun only, for example. That
Right.
within paganism, there's higher and lower, there's better and worse. Human society never stands still. It's always getting better or getting worse. It's never,
Right.
it doesn't just stay the same all the time. And so even we're not only a post-Christian society, we are a society that is becoming worse than the best of the pagan societies.
Wow. So how would you as Christians, how do you think we should be reacting to this? What is your um sense of how our progress should be as Christians within a society that's uh, deteriorating so much like this?
Well, I think that the first step is that we as Christians need to um, we need to reject the practice of assisted suicide, not just as individuals, but as churches, as a religion. We need to we need to we need to form a counterculture by fighting against it, and it's not easy, uh,
Mm,
and it's going to be a challenge. But I think that if the church wants to just avoid politics, uh, then the church can easily be led into the indifference toward great evil. Because politics, think about it. When people say, I don't want the preacher to be preaching politics from the pulpit, what are they saying? Well, they're saying that there's such a thing as right and wrong. There's do not murder, there's do not commit adultery, there's moral issues, and those aren't political. But then there is policy about how the government should legislate around such issues in society, and we don't want to get involved in partisan political debates. But we do want to have morality. The problem is that these two categories are difficult to keep completely separated,
right.
and they keep at the edges, they bleed into each other, and the line becomes very blurry. So if the church is so what the church has to say, what's our priority? If our priority is to avoid all accusations of being involved in politics, if that's our number one priority, then we're going to err on the side of being quiet about such things as assisted suicide or
Mm,
abortion or transgenderism or whatever the issue happens to be. We're going to not say much about that openly.
right.
If our priority, on the other hand, is to form a people who can be a counterculture and can who can live to the glory of God even in the midst of a decadent society, if that's our priority, then we're going to have to accept sometimes being accused of crossing the line from morality into politics in order to do that. And so the church has to make up its mind what the priority is. Is the
Mm,
priority to be uh, no matter where the Overton window moves to, no matter where the line between politics and morality gets to. Like for example, if I say assisted suicide is morally reprehensible and that politicians who promote it should be chastised and rejected by the church, we can't vote for people. If I say that, is that a political statement or a moral statement?
mm,
And that's the ambiguity that the church has got to deal with. Are we, so the problem is that as more things become legalized, so gambling is legalized, so drugs are legalized, so adultery is legalized, so murder is legalized. Well, as more things become legalized, they become political issues.
you're right.
As long as they weren't legalized 40 years ago, they were moral issues. And it was very clear that when you were opposing gambling or pornography or adultery or murder from the pulpit, that was clearly a moral issue. You weren't dabbling in politics. But then as those things become more and more legal, now we're debating, well, what should the government policy be on assisted suicide for minors with non-life threatening illnesses but chronic disabilities? Now it sounds like we're talking about a political stance, and maybe the conservatives will take one view and the liberals will take another view. So if we say anything about it, we're perceived as getting involved in politics. This is the dilemma in which we find ourselves.
Now, what about people that come out to a local church that have been um, that are a transgender person, or if they have had an abortion, or if they've used IVF themselves? How do we as Christians treat those people?
I don't understand the question. We treat them like anybody else.
Right. Okay. So
Is there
there's
a
not,
special way we should treat people with those particular
yeah,
sins, or should we treat them like any old sinner?
right. Yeah. So my question is more in the sense we're not going to shame those people for those actions, uh, right? What
Uh,
about Christians that have had IVF?
well, are we going to shame them? My goodness, I don't know what is that the same as preaching repentance?
Mm,
When
I
Paul
don't.
says, when
Yeah.
Paul gives the list of vices in Corinthians, he says, and such were some of you. Is he
Right.
shaming them, or is he talking about the things they need to repent of?
Right.
Um, we don't preach repentance that much in our. I mean, we preach it in theory, but we don't apply it to specific things very much in
Right.
our modern preaching. That may be something that has gotten us into a little bit of trouble because
Right.
today, if the preacher happens to mention a certain sin next Sunday morning, and that's the first individual sin that's been mentioned in that pulpit for a year, people are going to react. Why
Right.
is he singling that one out?
Yeah.
Now, if we were back in the 19th century listening to someone like Charles Spurgeon, who was naming sins every Sunday practically,
Right.
if one Sunday it was gambling, and the next Sunday it was pornography, and the next Sunday it was adultery, and the next Sunday it was abortion, and then he mentions a certain sin the next week, we would say, "Oh yeah, okay, typical." It
Right.
wouldn't stand out. It wouldn't seem like some strange thing. It would just, well, that's what preachers do. Like
Yeah.
Harry Truman is reported to have gone to church one Sunday. His wife was sick with a cold. She stayed home, and when he came home, um, she said, "Well, what did the?" What, and Harry Truman is the joke depends on knowing that Harry Truman was famously taciturn. He was very man of few words, and so she said, "Well, what was the sermon about? What did the preacher preach on?" He said, "Sin." Well, what did he say about it? He was again it. Well, okay, well, I mean,
Yeah.
the thing is that preachers today um, set themselves up for getting accused of delving into politics or isolating one sin above all others by not regularly preaching against sin. So that's where we run into the problem. I mean,
So does that come with almost rejecting the holiness of God from the pulpit?
not rejecting, just ignoring it, pretending it
Ignoring.
like it wasn't.
And what's worse? What's worse, apathy or rejection, right?
I don't know, but I think I think that um, the idea of sin is something that we modern modern liberal preaching has tended to turn sin into um, a, a sort of a disease or a disability or something that inhibits our ability to be good, and it's to be treated. We need a therapeutic approach, and modern evangelical preaching does the same thing. We tend to turn everything is about therapy. How do we help people with their healing? And so the idea of sin, Carl Menninger wrote a book years ago, Whatever Happened to Sin? He was this famous psychiatrist. And that is a characteristic of our preaching. Um, so I mean, I have some sympathy for the person who gets upset by the fact that the preacher singles out the one sin that happens to be currently being debated in Parliament and or currently uh, hot on social media or currently being debated and is front and center. Because I mean, if you want to be able to single out that sin, you should have a track record of having singled out a lot of other sins as well.
Others, yeah.
And if so, I think that the reaction of the listener to the preacher, is going to depend a lot on whether the preacher is perceived as being hard on all sin, or whether the preacher is just singling out this one and then ignoring all the
Right.
others.
Mm. Yeah. That reminds me of the televangelist type preacher that preaches so much against whatever issue, and then it comes out in their own personal life down the road, and it's the hypocrisy is even worse.
Yeah, I suppose, although hypocrisy is the tribute vice pays to virtue. And there is something worse than hypocrisy, and that is just absolutely accepting sin and making it out to be wonderful and good,
Yeah.
valorizing it. Uh, and
Wow.
that's even worse.
Yeah. Well, I mean, it's a very well, it's complicated, but it's not. If if I have got that right, it's a very serious issue, obviously. So I guess I don't know that I can go into much more. I mean, our positions are pretty clear. I think we agree on a lot of this, and I'm just wondering if there's any final words you might have for us today.
Well, I do think that I would say this: it is possible that our society is already under judgment. When you read the account in Exodus 4 to 14 of the hardening of Pharaoh's heart,
Right.
very interesting series of statements, because initially um, God says right at the beginning that he is going to harden Pharaoh's heart. He basically tells Moses that I'm going to make an example out of Egypt. I'm
Right.
going to show my power, my strong right hand. And I'm not, in other words, I'm not going to let Pharaoh give in too quickly. I'm going to draw this out and make it clear that the gods of Egypt are my creatures under my control. They're not able to save anybody. I'm going to make it clear that who I am as the one true creator God. He but then as the narrative goes on, sometimes it says that Pharaoh hardened his heart and then did something. And it's almost as if, as a result of God decide, like, God puts Egypt under judgment for things that Egypt has already done. It's not like, well, if Egypt does the right thing today, it's going to be fine.
Right.
But it's the 400 years of oppressing God's people and enslaving them, and all of the infanticide, murdering the Hebrew babies. I mean, Egypt's already under judgment for those things. It's already going to be judged for that. And Pharaoh, by doing even more things and by hardening, is he hardening his heart because his heart has been hardened? This is the mystery of
Mm.
the divine human relationship that is exposed in that narrative. It's possible that we should look at something like assisted suicide not as the sin that Canadians committed that got them judged, but rather as part of the judgment itself. That
Mm.
God has allowed us to get so depraved and so our consciences be so seared that as a society, we're under judgment and we're seeing it already acted out in the things that are happening to us. So maybe as a society, we are already in the process of being judged, and assisted suicide, along with abortion and pornography and gambling and a host of other things, that all of this is part of the judgment itself. It's almost hard to
Mm.
tell where the sin breaks off and the judgment begins. They
Okay.
flow into each other seamlessly. And so I think that rather than imagining, or assuming rather, that we have more time left in which to repent, we may not. We may already have crossed the line. And like when Isaiah is called to his ministry in Isaiah chapter 1 to go and preach to Israel, he's told in chapter 1 that he's told in the first 5 chapters that Israel's already under judgment and exile is coming. And his job is to tell Israel that as exile gets closer and closer and they go through this experience, his job is to explain to them why this is happening. And that is
Mm.
because an unholy people cannot continue to exist, and be in rebellion against a holy God and break his covenant and break his laws and desecrate his land forever, but without going under judgment. Isaiah is to explain that. And he's also to explain that there is a hope of salvation, but it lies on the other side of judgment. So,
Right.
in other words, my last point to make would be to say, uh, when we look at our society today, and we look at how rebellious and evil Canada has become, it may not be the case that we are approaching the point of being judged. We may already be in the middle of it,
Mm.
and our salvation may not. You know, Canadians. If Canadians repent, will God alleviate judgment? Maybe, maybe not. Maybe we will have to experience the equivalent of the fall of Jerusalem in
Oh.
our lifetimes, and only after that will there be salvation for a remnant. Um, I think that's the sort of thing that we need to. I think that sort of idea should weigh heavily on us, and it should cause us to have a little less self confidence and a little less. Uh, um, it should cause us to be more concerned than we are. We seem to be sleepwalking into disaster as a country. Maybe maybe that's because the disaster is already inevitable. It's just a
Right
matter of a
here.
few more years. And and all of that is just to say, when it comes, we should understand that this is not just an accident or a coincidence or a fluke of history, but this is
Right.
happening because we have turned away from God.
Well, that's a fine encapsulation of our time together, Craig. I really appreciate you. I know you just got back from Egypt. You said you're suffering a cold a bit. So I appreciate your time today. And it's been a great help to me, and I'm sure it'll be a great help to the listeners as well.
All right. Well, it's nice chatting with you. We'll do it again sometime.
I hope so. Thank you, Craig.
Okay. Bye bye.
Bye now.